Number 5, HAPAG-LLOYD 3378. On July 12, 2000, this Airbus A310 was bound for Hanover, Germany from Chania, Greece, when its landing gear had a malfunction, preventing it from retracting properly after takeoff. After a few unsuccessful attempts at retracting the gear, the crew was forced to leave it extended. They continued the flight to Hanover because the fuel had to be burned before landing regardless. Using the flight management system, the crew estimated the aircraft's fuel consumption, and the captain, in consultation with dispatch, decided to divert to Munich, Germany, where another A310 would be ready to take the passengers to their final destination. However, the crew was unaware that the flight management system was not designed to take into account the extra drag produced by the landing gear. As a result, with the rapid fall in fuel reserves, the captain was forced to divert to Vienna. About 14 miles from the runway, both engines flamed out, and with no time to do the checklist, the land recovery switch was neglected, resulting in limited controls of the ailerons. The aircraft's left wingtip hit a grassy surface about 660 meters short of the runway, followed by the collapse of the left landing gear. It skidded on the left engine and right landing gear, turning left 90 degrees, and finally coming to a rest near the end taxiway. Following the incident, investigators found the crew at fault for failing to deal with a minor technical malfunction of the landing gear and continuing the flight, resulting in fuel starvation. Number 4, KLM 867. While descending to a stopover in Anchorage, the aircraft flew through a thick cloud of volcanic ash from Mount Redoubt, causing all 4 engines to fail. After descending more than 14,000 feet, the captain and his crew were able to restart the engines and safely land the plane in Anchorage. The ash caused more than $80 million in damage, and the aircraft required all 4 engines to be replaced. Number 3, Air Canada 143. On July 23, 1983, Air Canada 143 was cruising at 41,000 feet over Red Lake, Ontario, when the crew received warnings indicating a fuel pressure problem on the left engine. Assuming a fuel pump had failed, the pilots turned it off since it was assumed that gravity would feed fuel to the 2 engines. Moments later, a second fuel pressure alarm sounded, this time for the right engine, prompting the pilots to divert to Winnipeg. Within seconds, the left engine failed. As they tried to restart the left engine, the cockpit warning system sounded again with the all engines out sound, followed by the flame out of the right engine. Now, as a glider, the first officer calculated whether the aircraft could reach Winnipeg. He found it to be too far to make and proposed to land at the former RCAF station in Gimli, a closed Air Force base, which, unknown to the pilots and the air traffic controllers, had been converted into a racetrack. As they were approaching the runway, the aircraft was coming in too high and too fast, so the captain decided to execute a forward slip, a maneuver commonly used with gliders and light aircraft to descend more quickly without increasing forward speed. Without power, the pilots used a gravity drop to lower the landing gear in hopes it will lock itself into place. The main gear locked into position, but the nose gear didn't, which later turned out to be crucial. Upon landing, the aircraft nose collapsed on the runway, and as it slammed into the racetrack guardrail, the friction between the surfaces helped it to slow down, coming to a stop 17 minutes after running out of fuel. Incredibly, there were no serious injuries among the 61 passengers or people on the ground. Number 2, British Airways 9. While en route for a 4th stopover in Perth, Australia, British Airways 9 was flying over Indonesia when it flew into a cloud of volcanic ash from the eruption of Mount Galunggung. Smoke began to accumulate in the cabin. At first, it was assumed to be cigarette smoke, but it soon grew thicker and had a sulfur odor. 2 minutes after entering the ash cloud, the number 4 engine began surging and soon flamed out, followed by number 2 less than a minute later. Subsequently, Almost simultaneously, engines 1 and 3 flamed out. Without engine power, the crew determined that the aircraft was capable of gliding 91 nautical miles from its flight level of 37,000 feet. To add to their ordeal, an altitude of 11,500 feet was required to cross the mountains on the south coast of Java to reach Jakarta, and if the aircraft was unable to maintain altitude by the time they reached 12,000 feet, they would have to turn back out to sea and attempt to ditch. As the aircraft reached 13,500 feet, engine number 4 finally restarted, followed shortly by engine 3, and subsequently with 1 and 2. With all 4 engines running, the crew expedited an increase in altitude to clear the mountains, but as they did, the aircraft returned to the ash cloud, which caused engine number 2 to surge again, forcing the crew to descend back to 12,000 feet. As Flight 9 approached Jakarta, the crew found it difficult to see through the windshield, which forced them to make the approach almost entirely on instruments. After the incident, engine number 1, 2 and 3 were replaced in Jakarta, as well as the windshield. The fuel tanks were also cleared of ash that had entered through the pressurization ducts. After the aircraft was ferried back to London, engine number 4 was replaced as well and major works was undertaken to return it back to service. Number 1, Air Transat 236. On August 24, 2001, Air Transat 236 was 4 hours into its flight to Lisbon, Portugal, when the pilots received a warning indicating a low oil temperature and high oil pressure on the right engine. There was no connection between an oil temperature or a pressure problem and a fuel leak, so the pilots suspected they were false warnings. They consulted their maintenance control center, who advised them to monitor the situation. 20 minutes later, the pilots received a warning of a fuel imbalance. They remedied the imbalance by transferring fuel from the left wing to the right wing tank, according to standard procedures, but unknown to the pilots, the right engine had developed a fuel leak on one of the lines. As a result, the fuel transfer caused the fuel from the left wing tank to be lost in the leak. The crew became aware of the leak based on the fuel calculations, and decided to divert to Lage Air Base in the Azores. Almost an hour later at 6:13 a.m., the aircraft was 135 nautical miles from Lage, when the right engine flamed out from fuel starvation. As a result, the captain initiated a descent to a flight level of 33,000 feet, which was the proper single-engine altitude. However, 13 minutes later, while still approximately 65 nautical miles from Lage, the left engine flamed out. Now without power, the pilots calculated that they could glide for about 15 to 20 minutes before being forced to ditch in the ocean, according to their descent rate of 2,000 feet per minute. Luckily, they spotted Lage Air Base a few minutes later. To dissipate excess altitude, the captain executed a 360-degree turn and a series of S-turns, which helped to slow them down as well. At 6:45 a.m., the plane landed hard at a speed of 200 knots, coming to a stop 2,400 feet from the end of the runway. 14 passengers and 2 crew members suffered serious injuries during the evacuation, and the plane suffered structural damage to the main landing gear and lower fuselage. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed this list, click that like button or subscribe to my channel to discover more facts about aviation.